Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. You may be listening on a pod. You may also be listening for the first time ever or watching on a YouTube stream. They're doing that for the first time tonight, giving it a try, seeing if we get some interaction with questions and whatnot. Love to hear from you fans with your comments, and we'll try to address what we can on the show. You can probably see if you're not blind, or you can't on the pod, that Jake Vogel is joining me to talk about the Ravens defensive, and I'll use air quotes, effort
Yeah.
against the Dolphins in week 2. How you doing,
Yeah.
Jake?
I'm doing great, Ken. Thanks for having me on. Unfortunately, this was about the worst week we could have for a defensive pod, but we're here and we're going to talk about it, so that's okay.
I dare not look, yet I cannot turn away. It's
Yeah.
really one of those kind of situations, a terrible uh, collapse by the defense in some ways that are not good. We're going to get into that a little bit. But first of all, where can people talk football with you online, Jake?
So primarily on Twitter, my handle is here right under my name. I mean, right under the photo, the video of me at Real Jake Vogel. I interact a ton on there. I also do some podcasting or kind of guest work, hopping on shows like yours. So, First and Gold Pod is the other place you can find me.
All right, great. Uh, Yeah, so many things went wrong in this game, but one thing I think we need to talk about, and especially with some breaking news today, is about the injuries. So Stephen Means got hurt on his very first snap of the day. The Ravens went into this game with only 3 true outside linebackers, and then they used Harrison there as well, some as they've been doing on an emergency basis these first 2 weeks. I consider it an emergency basis. You?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. It's tough when you have injuries like that and you start the season with as few outside linebackers as possible. Really, yeah, it's a tough scene.
Yeah, it certainly was. I mean, they did some things. They're using Means as part of the rotation with Owe and Houston, or they were using him that way before the injury. Kind of the worst possible timing in a lot of ways. Now, you don't want to get too grubby about the dollars on something like this, where Steven Means has lost the entire season, but the Ravens took a big cap hit for this to happen. Means had been brought on week 2. He was a veteran. His salary was only guaranteed week to week, but by being on IR, he's now guaranteed for the whole year, of course, and that costs the Ravens as well as Means, of course, quite a bit. So that's a shame. We wish the best for Steven. Hope he gets healthy. And the Ravens cap situation certainly didn't get any better, not through any fault of his own. The Ravens now have to try and go out and get an outside linebacker. I would presume they, at the same
Yeah.
time today, or coincidentally today, cut Kyler Fackrell.
Yeah, a really kind of bizarre situation when the depth at the position is getting so thin. I mean, it already is, and they cut him. So clearly, he wasn't working out. It wasn't going to be the right fit. So maybe they'll bring in somebody a little bit more accomplished. I know JPP, Jason Pierre-Paul, is the common name thrown around Raven circles, but it could be somebody else. Maybe there's somebody on a practice squad that the Ravens could poach to bring up that might be more appealing to some people.
To me, it almost has to be a vet min guy at this point with what they have left on cap. Now I guess they could get JPP on a vet min deal with bonuses that wouldn't be applied until next year's cap. Again, it might be a borrowing Peter to pay Paul situation that they don't really want to get into when they need the money to pay Lamar next year. Lots of other questions revolve around this. The first being that the Ravens need is really at Sam linebacker. And I think there's some questions right now about whether they're getting full, certainly full production out of Owe, whether or not he's producing at a level he's capable of. Part of that may be that he's playing a little bit out of position right now.
Yeah, it's tough because ideally Adafe Owe is your strong side rusher. He's the guy that's getting after the quarterback on an every down basis. You want him to be, pinning his ears back, getting to the guy, and instead he's being asked to, drop into coverage a little bit more than I think most fans would like to see. And without Tyus Bowser, without David Ajabo, which we haven't seen him at the NFL level, but not having other outside linebackers is really hurting what Owe could potentially do. And on top of that, we'll get into how much these guys are having to play. The snap counts are ridiculously high for Houston and Oweh.
Yeah, I completely agree. And obviously, that was a need of circumstance. Now, the only guy the Ravens have currently on the practice squad is Jeremiah Moon, who's a true outside linebacker. I've heard, it's said, I don't believe it, that Delshon Phillips could play outside linebacker and is really a hybrid outside inside guy. I think he's about as much an outside linebacker as Harrison is, which is to say not at all, and seems to be playing out of position. So obviously that was one serious injury, and it's for the year. When we look at what else happened during the game, that wasn't it. At cornerback, the Ravens are struggling through various injuries. We'll talk a little bit about how they, meted out snaps maybe, but Humphrey didn't play the last two series when the game was on the line, and I am really concerned about what that may mean.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a good situation when he's not out there. He played most of the game. He comes out, and the team is literally falling apart. That has to mean that the injury is more severe than just something that they're protecting him for next week. I would be very surprised if he plays against New England. Hopefully he can get back, get healed up, and play against Buffalo. But we have no idea what the severity of his injury is, considering he didn't go out there and make an effort, or maybe people were holding him back. I just don't quite understand that situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's not good. It wasn't another temporary injury, obviously, in terms of there was no concussion protocol announced, or there weren't other things. I mean, it doesn't make any sense unless something is more seriously wrong. And being a groin injury coming into the game that he'd been suffering through stands to reason it may have had something to do with that. I guess in the best case scenario, he might have been not quite up to covering the speed of the Dolphins on the outside, and they said, well, he could go into the game, but he won't help us that much, with the kind of speed he can actually put on the field right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we have to hope, and that can definitely get better. He can heal from that. It was just tough not having him out there, because when he was on the field, the Ravens weren't giving up many points, and it wasn't because of Humphrey that they did score points. So
yeah, Humphrey did look pretty good during the game, and that's something we certainly might talk about more. Damarian Williams, who I think was one of the Ravens who really played pretty well. Now everybody got a little bit burned, and he ended up giving up one of the touchdowns to the tight end, 85. Forget the name there, but
Cracraft.
Yeah, that's it. Is it Cracraft?
Cracraft. Cracraft.
Yeah,
Cracraft. Yeah.
So anyway, I thought he played very well. The one good thing to come out of this game, or one of the good things to come out of this game defensively, was that Damarian Williams really seems to be the Ravens slot corner now. I thought he earned that during the preseason. I don't think there's any business having Kyle Fuller on as the third corner. In fact, I thought it made a lot of sense to have him be a backup injury protection, kind of like Jimmy Smith, and kind of unfortunately ended up being a lot like Jimmy Smith. He's hurt already, and he played only briefly. But Damarian Williams looks like to be the real deal from the game he played against the Dolphins.
I agree completely. He looked really good in coverage. He was sticky. He made a couple plays on the ball. It's just unfortunate. There's going to be plays made on you when you're a young player, let alone if you're an alpha corner. I mean, it happens to Jalen Ramsey. So he took his lumps, but he looked pretty good out there.
A lot of things. We may get back to talking about him a little bit later. I don't want to get into it all right now while we're kind of introing the show here. Really epic fourth quarter collapse. Obviously, they entered the fourth quarter having just scored. Well, not too long left in the third quarter, a touchdown to go up 35-14, and then they got outscored 28-3 in the fourth. It could not be much worse than that, obviously. Yeah. But here's what's worse about this. The Ravens, when they've gotten in such situations, have been really expert at closing out games with a very soft prevent defense. This team is absolutely built to play dime defense and have eyes in the backfield, get turnovers. They had 2 turnovers earlier in the game. One of them was with the dime on the field. And I was really excited at halftime. They'd have 6 plays of dime or quarter in the first half. Last play of the first half was actually a quarter snap, their first of the year. They had 5 other dime snaps. total of 20 yards, 1 interception on those plays. And you're thinking, great, we got them where we want them. We're up 21. We got dime defense more or less the rest of the way. You got to play some other things in the third quarter, but it's going to be mostly dime the rest of the second half. And then it was the dime itself that actually completely fell apart. They allowed 12.5 yards per play on dime and quarter snaps.
Yeah, it's really bizarre, and I'm sure there's a lot more nuance to why it fell apart. Besides the fact that it was just a dime defense. I guess we can get into that a little bit later, but I definitely have some comments on the safety usage. At the beginning of the snap versus where those guys potentially could be.
Yeah, there certainly was some of that showing up, and we can talk about that whenever you want. But on the 60-yard touchdown up the left sideline to Hill in particular, yep. I have in the last few hours seen indications that I think that was Hamilton's error, and you've seen as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so to describe the play a little bit, Hill was on the left side in single covered by Jalen Armour-Davis, and I'll just say this. If there was no plan for safety help over the top, that's about the worst defense you can consider running at that point in the game. You're not sending the house to rush the passer with cover zero. Hamilton ran up to the line of scrimmage late and said something to Williams. Williams then bailed diagonally down the field towards the left sideline in a way I've never seen. Like you see guys bail out, they often will spread out from their point from the A gap or whatever, but you rarely see a safety on one side of the line of scrimmage bailing out hard to the other side. And of course, snap got made. Hill was much too quick for the play to get covered back there by Williams. And then at the end of the play, and of course, Williams was, to his credit, the closest to covering when the ball was, I think, caught would be the fairest way to say it. He's still 8 yards, 6 yards, whatever it was, away from Hill. Hill waltzed in easily, of course, touchdown. The very first thing you can see on some of the angles that I've seen is Williams clearly turning to Hamilton, who was also chasing the play, and making a symbol like this, as in, you're supposed to be back here.
Right.
That's something to really look for, by the way, after the play. Look for players emoting at each other. Tremendous clues to be found there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I saw the same stuff. I can't remember if it was that specific play or one of the other late touchdowns, but I just had a comment that, like, it seemed like Mike McDonald or the safeties themselves, but most likely the play caller, was just getting too cute with the coverage. I think it was let me find it here. Yeah, it was the 3rd and 6 in the fourth quarter with 5 minutes and 29 seconds left. Ravens rushed 4. The safeties were all near the line of scrimmage, all 3 of them. Chuck Clark, Kyle Hamilton, and Marcus Williams.
I think you're describing the 3rd and 6. You're describing the 60-yard touchdown.
Yeah, and okay. that was the one that we just talked about. So yeah, I just can't wrap my mind around how they would play it that way when they had the chance to get off the field, and I don't know.
I don't think that was coaching. I think it was execution. I think that was a case of Hamilton being in the wrong place. And Hamilton seems to be one of the guys who's getting off at various levels of blame here. But, there are 2 plays that he was involved in, one with Peters on the right side, where hard to really say if he's supposed to be deep covering that play or whether he is supposed to be. I think it was Waddle who was coming on a shorter crossing route, but it was still fairly deep. So the question was, if it's not him, then Queen has to be the backup for dragging that route underneath. And that's a big ask of Queen. And frankly, either way, I really don't like it as a scheme choice. I think it leaves you with a pretty big empty hole in the middle of the field. So, but obviously it was not a good thing that Peters was not on the back end of cover 3 and covering that. Peters is a very emotional player. Mm-hmm. And what I did not see after that play was Peters doing the thing he commonly does to other players, which is to cock his head or otherwise point at them or do other things. that would immediately tell you that guy did the wrong thing. This was more like Peters realizing he got beat deep, and not necessarily that he shouldn't let it happen, but that was on him. It was his responsibility.
Yeah, I noticed the same thing. Like it definitely did not look like he was looking for help after the play. He looked lost a little bit. You know, he had plenty of cushion, but it's Tyreek Hill and Peters is coming off a torn ACL, and that's just a tough situation. And honestly, the way Tua throws the deep ball, he doesn't really have the arm strength to get it there. It was underthrown enough that if Peters turned his head around, he may have been able to make a little bit of a play, but I think he just felt beat already, and that Tyreek had, passed him up too much for him to really make a play on the ball.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I see that Canis _FA says that Hamilton is responsible for both of the deep balls. I think you're possibly correct there, that there was supposed to be help coming from safety, but if it's cover 3, pretty good chance that Peters is actually the back end of responsibility on that, meaning there's somebody up closer. And obviously with Tyreek Hill, it doesn't really matter. It's your big danger is letting him get over the top. It's not 100% obvious that Hamilton couldn't have been back up on the back end for Hill. But he's got deep middle responsibility, and that's a little different. So he can go to one of several different places. But one of the things he's got to respect is a deep crosser, and that's, I believe, what was run underneath him by Waddle. So not 100% clear to me which way he should have gone on that play. But from Peters' emotional response after the play, that looked more like to me that Peters knew he was at fault than Hamilton. What the hell are you doing?
Right.
And it was also the second touchdown of the 2, right? I'm thinking correctly.
Yes.
So after what had happened on the first one, he would have been in Hamilton's face about it. I mean, I have to believe that he would not have. No, I'm sorry. It was the first of the 2. It was the first of the 2. So 48 was, and then the 60 was after it. So either way, I think it's Peters. He would have made it very clear how unhappy he was on the field had Hamilton had that responsibility. But it looked like he had deep third to me, and if so, then it's a difficult one to pin directly on him. Maybe Hamilton should have realized quicker what was going on in terms of having eyes in the backfield and been over. That's a fair judgment, but I don't think it's fair to say it was only his fault. I think Peters has got to be the back end of that cover 3, and it's got to be able to stay with Hill as well as he can. And what he did was not close enough.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. What do we want to get to next?
All right. Yeah, let's move on here. A whole bunch of things that didn't work out. I think we've hit on some of them with the particular notes we've been on. Otherwise, I thought, they did some decent things in the end zone, trying to cover passes. Clark was underneath on the touchdown pass that went high to Gesicki. That was like a zipper play, as you would call it. If you watch by the way, great watch if you can find it. I think you probably can. The 2004 Ravens-Jets game from the Meadowlands is available. It's usually on YouTube. Somebody posts it every so often, but the video is certainly available. Is a one done entirely by audio bites from coaches, players, and other people who are there at the game, including the announcers, but nothing from a narrator. Way ahead of its time. It's like the precursor to FX. Is that the show, or Sound FX, whatever it's called? Terrific broadcast, really worth going after it. And I'm forgetting now exactly what I was going to make in terms of a point.
The zipper play we were talking about, Mike Gesicki. Yeah.
So they threw it twice to Clarence Moore in that game for both of the Ravens touchdowns. They ended up winning 20-17 in overtime. But Clarence Moore went up high and threw it. And then, they were basically out of options. They said, okay, you want to throw a zipper again? Go ahead. But we have to kick if you don't make it, kind of thing. And sure enough, Clarence Moore goes up, gets the ball. He alligator armed an earlier ball. And you actually get to hear Billick say, that's what we talk about when we in redemption. After that earlier play, you may come back and made this one. So it's really cool to hear that kind of stuff. Ed Reed is playing rock, paper, scissors with Will Dempsey on who's going to blitz at one point. It's just there's some hilarious stuff in that video. It's really worth seeing. All right. Here's my biggest problem with the whole collapse. This team is entirely built around the safety depth that they have. I mean, it's the strength of the team. They kept Chuck Clark. They're prepared to make choices to get inside linebacker coverage deficiencies off the field entirely. So far, they have not done that. Queen's played every snap. They haven't found a replacement for him. Ross could have probably been it. He's now on IR. Don't know for how long, but he's on IR. It's a position where they had options. But one of the options they have is to get Stone on the field to play the back end, a much more disciplined cover guy, a much more play the bracket player, bring Hamilton up into the box where he can hopefully wreak some havoc and, in another sense, not cause problems while he's learning the NFL game, along with Clark. You can have your two better cover guys, Williams and Stone, on the back end. It would surprise me greatly if we don't see a move to that pretty quickly. I think Hamilton will still get snaps. I just think we're going to see more of Stone on the back end. We saw 8 snaps in this game.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And something that Hamilton was known for in college was the ability to cover tight ends. And you see that, throughout training camp with the matchups between Hamilton and Isaiah Likely, just putting him in the box, in the slot area, covering the big body players. It just makes a lot more sense than asking him to, do these challenging things. Safety and corner are both really difficult positions for rookies to learn at the NFL level. So while he's still, getting his feet wet, I love that idea of maybe moving Queen off the field occasionally because he still is not showing enough in coverage and getting those safeties on the field. Like Geno Stone's a good player, and he could definitely see some more time.
Yeah, I think that'd be an exciting change. And I with this game out of Queen, which was another one that was not good, I think that you got to start thinking about what's going on and all the problems, well, all the good that you do with the Ravens having a good shell, and they are short on that with the corners they have right now. But all of the good safety depth that they have is a little bit undone when you have Queen on the field on third down. You can rush the passer with him, but then that's just an inflexible player. And while Queen is fast and a reasonably big body to be that fast, he's honestly not that much better than a safety, I don't think, for rushing the passer. It gives you a little bit, but yeah. Anthony Levine had 3 sacks, and other Chuck Clark can give you something as a pass rusher when you need him to. So I don't really see the value in giving up that much coverage ability on that play. And we've said it earlier in this one, whatever they asked him to do that's between level 2 and level 3, we can pretty much assume it's not going to get done. It's too much to ask him to cover that part of the field.
Yeah, it was just a really disappointing game for Queen. A lot of people noticed that he had a better game in week 1 against the Jets, even though he was still saved at the end of that game by not having that touchdown pass caught, in the week 1 game. But yeah, it was really tough in coverage. He was slipping a lot on the field. I don't know if you noticed that too, at the second level where he was, running with someone and he just fell down. So I don't really understand what's going on with him in coverage, but until it gets fixed, I say you put somebody that's a little bit more reliable in there.
All right. Let's move on and talk about some packages now. And this is one of the things in this game where the Ravens, certainly they had options, but they also had constraints. And we need to talk about that a little bit as we go through this. Let's get back to my appropriate page here and start with what they did. They had the Dolphins ran 69 snaps. So the Ravens ran an assortment of plays. They ran one jumbo play that was on a 4th and 1 sneak by Tua, 1 yard snap. There's nothing really to say about that that's unusual. They just put a 4th down lineman in the game. When they played base, they did do something in particular. So base in the 3-4 defense, as most people know, is 3 down linemen, 2 outside linebackers, 2 inside linebackers, and 4 defensive backs, two safeties, and two corners. That's base defense, and you play it a lot. You play it a lot on first down. It's often the defense you start the game with, and you typically do it unless the other team puts three wide receivers on the field, even at the beginning of the game. There are down and distance situations where you then change those decisions, but most of the personnel decisions in the first half for the defense are actually made by the offense. The offense puts 11 personnel on the field. They are said to force the nickel, and that forces you to put that third cornerback on the field to cover that slot receiver. So anyway, base defense, what the Ravens did that was a little unusual in this game is they used two inside linebackers, but they also used Harrison at outside linebacker, which is essentially putting three inside linebackers on the field. Now, they put him at outside linebacker. I believe you're actually taking a loss in two different ways. And Jake, maybe you'd like to give your thoughts on this before I dig into this any deeper.
Sure. I mean, I thought Harrison had a decent game, especially early on. But what he does not offer is pass rush skill. He's kind of a liability out there when he's actually asked to get after the quarterback in any, sort of fashion. But he can hold the edge pretty well. And he can tackle running backs, but I don't really understand the usage besides the lack of healthy bodies.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what it was. And he was out there to start the games. They were already thinking about rotating Means, Oweh, and Houston and conserving all their snap. And then they lost Means, of course, on his very first snap. And those guys had to each take an increased role, including a pretty significant role by Harrison in this game. But I thought it was interesting that they ended up with him in the same package all these times. That didn't work out. At base defense, the Ravens gave up 125 yards on 15 plays. That's 8.3 yards per play. And when you think about it, that's more bad because most of their base defense was played in the first half before the Dolphins offense really got rolling. But it did happen that the 59-yard play to Waddle was one where he was on at Q2 14-14. So that was roughly half the yards involved in that. One of the early run plays, I don't remember if it was the first snap or one of the early Dolphins snaps from scrimmage, Harrison really got beat to the outside on a play where I thought that was maybe something he could get to, but he couldn't get depth or was beaten to the edge by the running back.
Yeah, the first one. So it's the first play is from scrimmage for the Dolphins. I had a 7-yard run. Bynes kind of got caught in the wash, and Harrison almost makes a play, but he didn't get there. So that might have been the one you're talking about.
Yeah, that's the one. That is the one. So having all three of those guys on the field definitely is you're not getting Tyus Bowser as an outside linebacker in terms of coverage skills. You're also probably not getting Tyus Bowser as a pass rusher. This team really needs him back, by the way. Can't even if I'm not even completely sure at this time whether this team needs Ronnie Stanley back more than they need Tyus Bowser. I think Ronnie Stanley is the biggest domino, so probably they still need him back more. But the team's so short at outside linebacker, I'm not even 100% sure of that right now.
Yeah, I mean, when you're just talking about pass protection, you can make a serious argument that Patrick McCary and what they're doing with chipping and stuff is doing enough for the offense to move the ball through the air. The running game is still dreadful outside of Lamar. But the pass rush is non-existent, outside of Justin Houston, who I thought did play really well. I think he got gassed. But he was one of the players I thought did a good job in this game.
Yeah, really one of the only guys to provide pass rush value in the game. Tua had the ball out quickly a bunch of times. I want to get into that in the pass rush, but basically 24 of 50 or 51. I think he threw 50 passes, so he had 51 dropbacks, including the sack, and 24 of those times he had the ball out quickly, which means before pressure could develop, the ball was out. They had all sorts of slants and screens and swing passes to running backs, and even the play action they ran developed really quickly. So they were doing things there. Tua is a pretty rare and different cat in some ways from Lamar in that he does go pretty much all the way into the mesh point on a lot of his play action fakes, which Lamar does not. So I was very impressed by that in terms of what he brought to the table. In terms of accuracy, he obviously had a great game in this one. Did maybe slightly underthrow both of the deep balls, but on that when
they're wide open, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Not only does it not matter, you're incented to underthrow it slightly because it's just you need to maximize the completion percentage as opposed to the yak at that point. So, all right. Let's talk about packages some more. So the nickel, the standard nickel, when they got to play it, was terrific. 2 down linemen, 2 outside linebackers, 2 inside linebackers. This is the standard one with 3 cornerbacks and 2 safeties. Let's talk about what's the difference between that and the big nickel. And there are a couple, even though it should be only one player. You should be changing a safety for a slot corner. And you had the third safety on, of course, was Hamilton. And the third cornerback on was Demarion Williams. So you can see maybe how the upgrade went there. But in addition, they played a lot of Harrison in the big nickel. So they had 3 inside linebackers on the field I'm sorry, I have this wrong. They played a lot of Harrison on the field as one of 2 inside linebackers on those packages. So that was something we saw. The standard nickel, 11 plays, 31 yards, 2.8 yards per play. By far the Ravens' most effective package in terms of what happened. They were responding to 11 personnel with it. So right there, with the Dolphins' threats that they can provide in terms of 11 personnel, you would think that's an area where the Ravens might be in a little bit of trouble. But the nickel came through and was decent in that way.
Yeah, I will say the linebackers on the field were a little bit problematic when you're talking about the way Mike McDaniel and that Dolphins offense were moving around Jalen Waddle throughout the game. And he was the guy, I mean, both him and Tyreek Hill, but Waddle was the guy throughout the whole contest was really destroying the Ravens defense. They were moving him around. He was getting lined up against linebackers because when you're the innermost slot receiver on a side and the defense is playing in a nickel or base or, a situation where it's a zone coverage and you just have the second level defender as a linebacker and a safety, that's what he was getting. And he was just finding this open space and creating yards after the catch. And you can't have those situations, but it's also hard when the offense is changing what the unit looks like from the huddle to then breaking and all the motion that they do.
Yeah, I mean, they have motion. They also, because they use a lot of the same multiple tight end looks that the Ravens did, they played a lot of 12. That's why, the Ravens responded with some big nickel looks. That gives defensive coordinators fits on how they'll line up against receivers depending on where they line up. So yeah, there were issues with that. I did think Demarion Williams did a reasonable job. He did some good jobs reaching across the body of the receivers that I really like. It's one of the things I really liked in this game was seeing that he's a short corner who has length issues, and length issues at corner can be really severe because, when you have a true contested catch, that length really helps in terms of being able to get to the football first, dislodge the football, even if you get there second, all of those things. But he has a late breaking leap he's done, and he's been able to do it a number of times without creating a pass interference flag that I've been really impressed by. And just in that respect, he did some very good things here. I do think Hamilton did some good things as well, but I'll give you a chance to respond first of all to the Demarion Williams stuff. All right, I think we may have a frozen screen from Jake here. Not sure. Still with us, Jake? Okay, well, he'll be back. So anyway, the other player I want to make sure we talk about a little bit here is in the big nickel when Hamilton was on the field. So one of the problems here is that the results, of course, 16 plays, 104 yards, and We got you back, Jake?
Yep, we're back.
All right. Outstanding. Fantastic. So I want to give you a chance to talk about Demarion Williams a little bit before we move on to Hamilton and the big nickel.
Yeah, so I thought Pepe played extremely well in spots. He gave up the touchdown, but prior to that, I believe it was just the play before, he
Yep.
had a beautiful pass deflection where you're the same thing that you're talking about, reaching across the frame, knocking that ball down against Craycraft. A tight end, number 85. He actually, I think he's a wide receiver. He's listed as a wide receiver for them. A little bit smaller frame, but nonetheless, he's bigger than Pepe. Most people are. So it was impressive to see the sticky coverage there, and I believe he had a couple other pass deflections or nice hits that kind of jarred a ball out.
Yeah, they weren't all called that, but
Yes.
for my money, he had 3 pass deflections in the game. One of them came when the play got hurt, where he knocked the ball loose. He's got to be given some sort of credit for breaking up that pass. Another one was on a ball behind him, where he definitely finished off. Behind the receiver, where he definitely finished off the separation from the football, even if he didn't start it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought a terrific game from him, and I really hope we see more of Pepe. I think he gives you some things that are good. Downhill player too.
Mm-hmm.
He's tough. He did get blocked pretty easily, but I think it was Armstead who actually made the block on him, that's going to be a mismatch for any corner. On that little 6-yard swing pass to Waddle or wide receiver screen on the left side was one of their early touchdowns. Might have been their touchdown the first half. He just kind of walked in, even though there was a substantial amount of traffic. They had everybody blocked.
Yeah. Trying to see if I found it. That's okay.
All right, no problem. Let's move on to Big Nickel here a little bit, because Hamilton was in the game then, and Hamilton did some good things in this game. I think he had a big hit to make sure the play was finished on a 3rd and long, where there had been consecutive pressures by Houston, who didn't close down the sack, and then Campbell, who came in and got a second pressure on the play to kind of force the throw out, and then Tua threw the ball well short of the line to gain, and Hamilton came in and finished it off quickly. If that play had been a little different in terms of timing, I think it would have been a forced fumble, and or definitely could have been.
Absolutely, yeah. That was a huge play by Hamilton. You really kind of felt, all right, he's starting to come into his own a little bit, making that hit, and you're right that the timing of it, it was good in some respects. Incompletions are good, but forced fumbles and creating those turnovers is just special. And if he waited a little bit, or was just further down the field and then hit him, there is that chance of a forced fumble. But nonetheless, a nice hit by Hamilton. He did a couple. He had a couple of those plays in this game where he also gave up some things, and most likely was the fault of some of the deep touchdown issues. But he had some nice plays as well.
Yeah. All right, well, let's move on. The standard dime was kind of the one of the real problems in this game. The Ravens had played really good dime defense for effectively 52 minutes of this game. And in the last 8 minutes of the game, they surrendered 4 plays of 20-plus yards. And they weren't just over 20. They were 48, 60, 21, and 28, all in the final 7:54. And then for the game, they gave up 23 plays for 262 yards in the standard dime. That's 11.4 yards per play. This is the Ravens' strength, folks. This is what they do really well, as they play dime defense, and they give opportunities for players on the back end to get interceptions. They have eyes in the backfield, wreaking havoc on a receiving core, and the Dolphins were just able to run right by the entire Ravens defense, which takes away some of the value of that dime. And it's what's so frustrating about this game is the Ravens had exactly the game script that they wanted into those, go into the fourth quarter, even go into the last 8 minutes, if you want to talk about that, but going into the fourth quarter for certain. And they couldn't capitalize on it. They had a big lead. They had the ability to play dime every single snap if they wanted to. And Miami was passing every down. So it's not like they ran the ball a bunch of times. They threw right in, around, and through it. That is what's exceptionally frustrating, is that this is the Ravens' strength. And the only thing that they can do right now, as I see it, is these same players have to get better at the things they just failed at, which is one of the hardest things. It's not like, we can advocate for a new scheme or there's going to be something that's different about the way they rush the passer. Maybe you could point to that. But I think primarily this is just, they got to get better at playing dime defense and playing good assignment football that allows them to get the turnover opportunities they had earlier in the game.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot to it in this game. Like with Humphrey going out, changes the personnel. The pass rushers getting gassed. The offense, slowing down to just a sputtering speed, I guess, in the fourth quarter. And the offense also, like with that, they were not taking time off the clock and they were putting the defense back on the field. Even with the spectacular run by Lamar Jackson, they only had 2 plays prior to it. So that series, the offense had a first down and a second down. And it was a 3rd and 2, I believe. And Lamar housed it for a 79-yard touchdown, which was great. We were up 35-14, I believe, at that point. But then it was downhill from there for the offense. And this is not an offensive pod, so we don't need to get into the 4th down conversions and the lack thereof. But so much of what went right in 2019 was the clock management, the ground and pound control, and that helps the defense so much. And in this game, we saw the opposite of that in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, they got outsnapped badly in this game after being way up early on. They after that first drive where they had it for 10 minutes, even though the Dolphins had a pretty long drive, and the Ravens had an 18-play drive that ended in the fumble, but still 18 plays. The defense being out there on a hot day is a nice thing. That was really a shame to see them lose the snap count in the end by 15? Was it 69-54? I think for the game.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
They lost to the Jets last week. This is very un-Ravens-like, and it comes back to the inefficient run game. And you really can't fault the Ravens or Lamar certainly for a 79-yard run for a TD, obviously. But you can say I'd rather have these yards per carry be a little bit less barbelled than they are in terms of the results, and not have 12 carries for 12 yards from my top running backs. I don't know if it was quite that bad, but it wasn't good.
Right.
But between Davis and Drake, Davis was particularly just seemed to be running into a brick wall.
Exactly. A brick wall is the same exact terminology I would have used. It was pathetic. I don't really know if there is some sort of vision issue, but I primarily would put this on the offensive line not getting a lot of push for these guys. And Justice Hill, he didn't have many snaps, not many carries in this game. He had the one that was a highlight, which is sad. It was like an 11-yard run, but that was a highlight for the Ravens running backs. And there's a clip going around Twitter right now with just this image of the play where there is this gaping hole where he could have just housed it, with his 4.3 speed, potentially, scored a touchdown. The Ravens end up scoring a touchdown because it's the end of the first half drive where they're going down. I guess Hill possibly could have been getting out of bounds to stop the clock, but the Ravens did have 3 timeouts. Nonetheless, I was just commenting on the run game and how Justice Hill might be the guy until Dobbins gets back. We'll see what happens this next week.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not honestly sure Dobbins will be the complete answer for the Ravens. This is unfortunate. They have a little bit of the speed player they need probably in Hill to get to the outside. Now, I agree with you that he really missed an opportunity to turn it north, as I've heard it being called. But one of the issues there was I think the defense was collapsing from inside out at that point. I'm not saying he made the right choice. I think he made the wrong one, but I think it only would have been about a 20-yard run, not a 45 or something based on, where he was on the field. But it's still wrong choice, certainly the wrong angle. And it looked like both of the blockers were setting up for him to move to the inside. So,
exactly. They were both blocking outside and he had this lane. Nonetheless, I mean, they scored, so the sin isn't as bad.
Yeah. All right. Only one other package I want to talk about. That's the quarter. So on those, the Ravens all lined up each time with Oweh, Houston, and Queen on the field. One defensive lineman that did change some. I think it was Campbell and Matabike on 2 or 3 of the plays, and 4 safeties in the game. So we saw that for the first time this year with Stone and Hamilton both on the field at the same time with the big 2, and 3 cornerbacks. The first play was the last one of the first half. That went for just a run left for 3. For whatever reason, they decided to run out the clock, but they didn't decide to kneel it. I can't come up with any logical reason why they do that. The Ravens weren't trying to call timeout. So.
Yeah, I don't know. What was that?
Silliness. And then unfortunately, the next 2 were both touchdown passes. They're both 2 of the second half touchdown passes, and they were only, quote unquote, 14 and 7 yards. So it doesn't make the overall yards per whatever look as terrible as some of the other splits do. But both of those were touchdowns, including the game-winning touchdown with 19 seconds left.
Yeah, I feel like the last one was partly due to injury, the situation that they had all of the safeties on the field. I believe another corner went down, or maybe they were just trying to get their best coverage players on the field. But you could talk yourself into that. If Humphrey was available, would Geno Stone have been on the field, or would probably Hamilton would have still been out there because of his length?
Right. They did not have Humphrey on the field.
Yeah.
They did have Stone. They did not have Demarion Williams. That was a big loss.
Yeah, Pepe,
and they put Worley back on the field. Yeah, I've been calling him Pepe all the time. I know he prefers that. We're running into this thing always too, where when we're doing the notes, I have this D Williams and
Marcus as well, right?
And Marcus, and I keep wanting to call Marcus Chad Williams, the old Ravens safety who was a really good dime back. But anyway, it's D and M. All right, so that takes us through the packages right now. Now we're going to take a 2-minute bio break here. I hope people can understand someone my age needing to go to the bathroom a lot and not kid me about it too much. But we'll take a break. We'll be back in about 2 minutes, and we'll try and get to some of the questions and talk about some individual players and the Ravens pass rush in this one. Talk to you in a minute. Sorry, how are we doing, Josh?
All good. We just got to do a little closing for that first episode.
Okay, you want me to throw that in?
Yeah, because you just stopped after the packages, so that's where we're going to cut off part 1. So if you can just say, "Hey, we're going to."
Okay, I'll do that. I'll record that right now.
All right, that'd be great.
Hey, folks, hope you'll join us for part 2 when we come back and we talk about the pass rush, some individual player information, and take some questions from the film study mailbag. But thanks for joining us so far. Again, give Jake Vogel a follow. He's at Real Jake Vogel, and he'll be back for us for the second part as well. Talk to you next time on Film Study.
All right, that's good. That's a much better transition. Then we're going to take a 2-minute break and end in there.
Okay.
So,
and we can cut out all that. I had to go to the bathroom stuff too. All right. The people here who are on part of the live stream are getting to experience the whole. Yeah.
Yep.
I
And
had
they
to go
got
to
a
the
whole
bathroom
bunch.
thing.
Yep. They got a bunch of questions here, and I've pulled some questions from Twitter, so we'll get to all that at the end.
Okay, very good.
So
I'm ready to go again. We ready to roll?
Yeah, come on in. Yep. Just do another little intro because this is part 2, second podcast for tomorrow.
Got it. 3, 2, 1. Hi, folks. Welcome to part 2 of the defense podcast from that horrific week 2 loss at home to the Dolphins. Joined again by Jake Vogel. Jake, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Ken. How about you?
I can't complain too much except for the game, and then who's going to really listen. So let's get on with it. We promised folks we'd be back and talking a little bit about the pass rush in part 2 here, and let's get right to that. So don't know what you thought in general, but let's get some of your thoughts out there at first about what Macdonald did and whether or not you thought he had some limitations or whatnot that were holding him back. A fairly conservative rush from my point of view.
Yeah, it was not the best game from a pass rushing standpoint, to say the least. Tua was getting the ball out quick. That was clearly something that Mike McDaniel and company planned ahead of time. They were very successful at it. They have yak playmakers, probably 2 of the best ones in the NFL. And on top of that, the Ravens are extremely thin at the edge rushing position. So Justin Houston looked good to me in this game. He should have had 2 sacks, maybe more, but probably a definite 2. He ended up with the 1. There were a couple defensive linemen that made some plays. I thought Broderick Washington had a couple nice plays in this one. Michael Pierce continues to stand out to me, perhaps in ways that he didn't in his first stint in Baltimore. So I want to give him a shout out. He's really moving the pocket and getting after his guy pretty well, even when it comes to rushing the passer. And then just some other notes I would have. He did fluctuate a little bit with how many guys he sent. I would say most of the game was 4, and I believe the most successful rush that the Ravens typically had was 4. I believe one time they had a really nice play with the 5-man rush. Other than that, when they went to 3 or 2, it was not good. There were instances of that, and then there were a couple times where they rushed a few extra. So it was kind of a pretty basic game plan with the pass rush being just that base 4. But there are some issues when they get kind of sneaky with it. I think dropping all their guys into coverage outside of 2 or outside of 3 didn't really help in terms of the result. We saw that on, I believe, the Mike Gesicki touchdown. I can pull that up.
No, you're right. They had a 2-1 pass rush on one of those plays, and it certainly gave ample time and space. And what happened on that particular play? Let me find that. Yeah, it was the 14-yard touchdown. I think it was Gesicki in the back of the end zone on Zipper, right? It was a 14-yard touchdown anyway. So yes. I believe that's the one that was over Clark's head. You're talking about some of the elements that I have recorded in data for. So I'd like to kind of go through that in terms of what we have. So you mentioned the ball out quick 24 times, 47% of his 51 dropbacks. Tua had the ball out quick. He had ample time and space on 14 out of 51. That's 27%. That's probably a little lower than normal. So that part is not bad. But when you add those two together, that's 75% of the balls that got out before pressure could develop, and only 13 plays the Ravens generated a pressure in this game. I saw the interesting comment you forwarded me from Josh Hirschmeyer, right?
Yes, it was on Twitter. Let me see.
Anyway, I'll give you the without putting it out there directly. His big thing about was that the fourth quarter that the pass rush got gassed. That's certainly going to happen in any game where you have guys on the field for multiple plays and the Dolphins run as many plays as they did in that fourth quarter. There's a lot of consecutive plays being run, and it's going to be very difficult. I think that's a fair reason why it happened. I also think there were some coverage breakdowns that when it got bad for the pass rush, that they then were not able to, be within 5 yards of a receiver on some of these plays.
Right. Yeah, it was Josh Hermsmeyer, as you mentioned. And you had a good response to it. But basically it was kind of telling us that in the first half, the Ravens were getting this pressure on Tua at a good rate. I think it was 50% pressure. And then in the second half, it dramatically decreased or the fourth quarter, like to under 20% on the rushes. So I think there was a mixture of getting gassed and players going out and changing how many guys were rushing and lots of different variables, but clearly it was better in the first half when they were playing less snaps, getting off the field, and the turnovers were, incredibly key in this game, even though the Ravens didn't come out on top. Like, this seems like a feast or famine defense that we saw. If the Ravens can capitalize on turnovers, they will do just fine. But I mean, I thought Miami was moving the ball pretty well during the whole game. And we kind of were blessed with Marcus Williams as our new safety back there, grabbing 2 interceptions in the first half.
I mean, I think that's true, but that's also the way this team is built in terms of strengths is, reading the quarterback and trying to make plays on the football. It happened this week that Williams had 3 outstanding chances, converted 2 of them, actually converted the 2 really difficult ones.
Right.
And the easy one he managed to drop, which was unfortunate because that would have won the game right there. I'm convinced. A few more stats here because you mentioned the pass rush by numbers. It's a fairly simplistic way to look at it, but I always provide it anyway. 3 or fewer. They had 7 plays for 57 yards, 8.1 yards per play. When they rushed 4, 31 plays, 274 yards. That's 8.8 yards per play. 2 turnovers. With 5 rushing the passer, they had 12 plays for 126 yards, 10.5 yards per play with 1 sack. To put it simply, nothing worked. I mean, it's the easiest way. They did have 1 6-man rush, which ended in a 2-yard play. Now, obviously, we have some large number concerns there, but they only rushed 5+ on 25% of plays is what that means. So they didn't really make an effort to blitz with numbers in this game. And somebody like Wink would look at that and he'd probably say 5+. What are you talking about? I want to see some 6s. I want to see some 7s, sprinkled in that group as well.
Yeah, when the secondary is that beat up and we have rookie corners in there, I don't really blame him for not going heavier on the pressure looks, but he did keep it very vanilla. I will say that, like, when they went 5, it was typically just an inside linebacker being that 5th man. I didn't see anything super exotic when I was going through this game for the second time.
Yeah, I get some other measures of deception they had, but there wasn't a whole lot. It was a limited deception game, that's for sure. So they had 9 individual blitzes. So those are from off ball. So I'll tell people again, because I usually like to say at least once per season how this is defined. If you're at least as far out as the slot corner and at the line of scrimmage, then you're a deceptive blitzer if you come. That would be like a cat blitz of any sort, an outside corner or even a slot corner coming. You're automatically a blitzer and you haven't declared yourself as such. Otherwise, if you're within that spacing, you have to be at least 1.5 yards off the line of scrimmage to be a off-ball blitzer. So most linebackers fall in this category. Other people who may be moving around a line of scrimmage and then show up late may be in that group. But that's a blitz. They only had 9 of those individually, and 3 of those were paired. So they had 2 blitzers on each of 3 plays. Those plays, by the way, PM48, PM2, and PM21. So even blitzing Patrick Queen on those plays didn't really help improve the quality of the coverage on the back end. And I don't have much to say about it other than, it's not a ton of trickery to use for an entire game. The 0.18 per pass play number is very low in terms of off-ball blitzes. And part of regulating expectations is getting back to the fact that Tua threw the ball 50 or dropped back 51 times in this game. So any number that might be large for another game isn't really very large for this one. We just got off a game, of course, where Flacco threw something like 57, 58, 59 times.
Right. Yeah. Something else I noticed in this game when it came to the rush, a lot of it was interior defensive lineman heavy. This is not the Ravens of old. I mean, so much of it has to do with the personnel that we currently have, with the outside linebackers not, being there. But you're talking about Calais Campbell, Broderick Washington, Justin Madubuike, Michael Pierce doing a lot of the work on these second down, third down rushes, where you didn't see that as much in recent years. And I really do think a lot of it just has to do with personnel.
Great point, Jake. Absolutely on the money in terms of who does that. We saw that first game. We saw really good interior pressure across the line. We saw lots of one-on-one wins. This game, we saw less of that. And it was a variety of people trying to do that. Calais Campbell had a decent game of rushing the passer, I think. Not exceptional. Even last week against the Jets, I thought he was probably not close to the top of the pass rushers for the Ravens interior linemen when, Pierce is having a big game. And who else had a big game last week?
Madubuike did have a good, yeah.
So Madubuike wasn't terrible in this game or anything, but he wasn't Madubuike against the Jets in terms of his winning one-on-one games. And I would have thought, if anything, your opportunity against the Dolphins, who have some significant deficiencies on their interior. Liam Eichenberg is a Notre Dame tackle who moved to guard to basically cover up for short arms. He had a terrible year at tackle last year for the Dolphins, and he got moved inside. Appropriate move. Not a guy who has any NFL pedigree as a great pass blocker, certainly. And they have the center number, I want to say he's 58 in this game. Connor Williams. I think that's it.
Yeah.
Another guy
right.
who, should be a guy you can beat one-on-one. I thought they had better opportunities, honestly, this week than against the Jets. I thought this, you got Flacco, who's very immobile, but you have some guys you can really beat one-on-one.
Yeah, I thought going into this game that the Ravens would have an advantage against the Dolphins offensive line, and it didn't really show up like that, which is extremely disappointing. I thought Oweh would have his opportunities with their tackle injuries. They do have a good one from the Saints, but other than that, I mean, they have been banged up there, and their interior offensive line is not anything special. So I thought the Ravens would be able to feast a little bit, considering what we saw just the week prior.
Well, Teron Armstead was on the left side, and so most of the day he was blocking Houston, and Oweh was staying on the side with the tight end. So he ends up with either a tight end or being blocked by that right tackle. And his name is escaping me right now in my thoughts here, but it'll come back to me in a sec. Is it Austin? No, he was the guy who's had to sit out, right?
Yeah,
right tackle's Little.
Okay.
Larry Little, I remember from the 1970s. He was a hell of a guard for the Dolphins, but this ain't Larry Little.
Yeah.
So
the one comment I wanted to make when you were talking about Houston on that against the offensive left side, his sack and then almost sack came when he was unblocked.
Yes,
in the game. So the tight end was kind of in a tight end right / H-back alignment, was motioning to the offensive left, trying to block Houston. He didn't really get much on him at all on the sack. And then on the next play, it was the same thing. He was unblocked, and he really should have brought down Tua, but it didn't happen, and he got out of it.
Yeah, it was a good sequence there. He had 3 consecutive pressure events during that thing, and then I think he had 2 in a row or 2 in a 3-play sequence later in the game, which really a lot of his pressure was provided during those 2 kind of streaks. What else do we want to talk about here? They stunted 6 times. This is one of the funny things. So the Ravens are a good stunting team. They've got good under players. They've got enough speed to go over. So you like what they bring to the table, and I especially like what an under can do when that block gets peeled, when the unpeeling is done by the looper. Right. And the Ravens have good guys for doing that. They had 6 guys. They had 6 stunts in the game, as I mentioned. 5 of those were during the first half. And then it seems like they might have gone into halftime and said, okay, we need to cut down on the stunts. We're not, keeping discipline on the pocket against Tua like we'd like to. And that could have been literally part of it, is they said, we don't want to do this. They didn't blitz a lot in the second half, which is that usually reduces stunts, because you can't usually blitz and stunt on the same play. In fact, the players are allowed to call some stunts on field. And I've seen Calais Campbell talk about this. He says, we can call it. We can decide on ourselves on field. We just can't do it if they have a blitz planned. So, there were times in the second half, they certainly had the ball plenty, that Campbell was certainly on the field for a lot of those plays. He could have said, okay, I'm under, you're over on this play. And let's try this, because nothing else is working. And they really didn't make any effort to do it in the second half. So I have to think McDonald was probably telling them, don't do that.
Yeah. I mean, they were definitely getting tired out there for multiple plays and big plays where the offense would go down the field. I don't know how much hurry up Miami did, but they were moving the ball pretty well, and those big plays where the guys are running down the field with them can certainly have an effect on the pass rush.
Yeah, I agree, and yet it really did not seem like, I would say, like you mentioned, that they really pressed an advantage with no huddle. In fact, I thought as the game was getting further along and they were driving for the tying touchdown, they did some things that told me they were trying to win it. They were just trying to tie the game and not win it with a second possession. Almost the alacrity of the huddle was very limited. I said, they're doing the Ravens a favor here. And it did not turn out to be the case, of course,
right?
Because they could pretty much score at will. But anyway, frustrating, obviously, from a pacing perspective. What happened to the Ravens, their inability to control pace, largely with the running game and the efficiency they've gotten there, just didn't exist in that fourth quarter, and that was a part of not being able to close it out. All right, how about we talk about some individual players here, and you're the guest, Jake. Even if we talked about them already, but pick some players off and on if you have a new thought that we haven't gotten to yet. Let's go.
So I definitely have. We've talked about my favorite players from the game. I'll go. I don't know if you want to do 3, 2, 1 on this show, or if you do that at the end.
I don't usually do the MVPs after a loss, but you can do it if you want to. By all means, you're the guest, please.
Well, definitely not an MVP. We'll just call it a moral victory for these individual players. I would say Michael Pierce was number 3 on my list for the defense. I just thought he created a decent amount of pressure in the pocket and is getting after the quarterback in a way that we really haven't seen in Baltimore from him. And I thought he used to do that a little bit, but he might be on another level, and it's really interesting with his size and shape. He doesn't look like a guy that can move that well, but he really can get downhill in a hurry. So I liked a lot of what I saw from him. He was, making effort to tackle running backs that kind of got past him too. I thought he played well despite the loss.
I did too. I thought he played pretty well. I mean, the first week he led the entire defensive line in snaps, which is amazing. I mean, nose tackle doing that. There's limitations on when you would want to have that player on the field that didn't persist with Pierce, since he was having such a big game against the Jets, winning a lot of one-on-one matchups. But there's something else I like from Michael Pierce this year. You mentioned it's different from his first iteration. It really could be assignment based more than we think, because he clearly has had a run first defense mentality that's been there. It's not just a mentality, it's an assignment of, you're going to be a 2-gap player and we need you to make sure you're controlling, here and here, right. And not a case of, you're free to penetrate. And I think Pierce has been cut loose much more. He's been greenlit much more to penetrate this year. And he's really looking good at it. I thought, for one thing, I think he got held on one of the plays where he looked like he had a pressure in this one, or he's close to a pressure anyway. It was a shame that didn't get called, but it just is, it looks like a different Michael Pierce in terms of his ability to win one-on-one. And maybe it was always there and just, he wasn't allowed to do it back then.
Yeah, I have to think that he's grown in that area, but I also believe that the defensive scheme and what he was being asked to do is a little bit different now than it was. It was very much two gap, and now it's a little bit more one gap penetrate. So it's good to see.
He really goes back mostly to the Pease era, right? I'm trying to think. He took
Yeah,
2020 off, then he played 1 year in 21. So I guess he played 1 year under, or maybe 2 years under Wink. Wink was 18 or 19. He came on to be he came on 18. So he might have gotten 2 years under
18.
Wink. Yeah. What about Wink? You missing Wink at all after this game? Any components of Wink? This has come up as a question here. If we could bring this up, Josh, I've lost it here on my list on the right.
That's a tough one after a loss like that to say for certain. I mean, do I think he would have called a better game at the end of the game? I maybe with his experience, Wink could have possibly helped them win the game, but I don't really know that it's a huge difference because of the personnel out there. It was a huge miscommunication issue, and I think a lot of that was execution on the field, and certainly credit goes to coaching. But I'm really not sure if I'm missing Wink yet. I did like the coordinator, and I think Mike McDonald is going to bring some good things to Baltimore. So it's too early for me.
Trying to think how Wink would react having the personnel available to him that he did in this game. Whether the Wink extremely outside linebacker heavy in terms of
Right.
being he put as many as 5 on the field at one time. He frequently put these race car packages on the field with 4, and 3 was your standard, that he would kick some outside linebacker inside in a 3 outside linebacker dime for most of his tenure here. So I'm sure it would drive him nuts to only have 2 guys who are really active outside linebackers plus Harrison, filling some spots.
Yeah, absolutely. Next guy for me would be Justin Houston, and we talked about him. We don't have to talk about him long. I thought he had a pretty good game. He was the only guy with the sack on the team, and he created, I believe, the most pressure events out of any of the defensive players. So he still looks good. For whatever reason, Odafe Owe hasn't really been able to break out yet this year, and hopefully that'll come when we get Tyus Bowser back, or maybe sooner than that. That would be the hope for sure. But yeah, I think Houston is still the best guy in that outside linebacker room until Owe proves it.
I would agree. I mean, that's what it looks like right now. I mean, they're asking Owe to play out of position. Owe and Houston really play the same rush linebacker position, where they're both used to being opposite a tackle, having to beat that tackle in a one-on-one matchup, not having this screwy tight end situation involved. And you think that would give you a lot more advantages, but there's really chipping plays that occur over there. There's responsibilities he has in terms of having to jam the receiver off the line of scrimmage that can be different. So we need to see more from Owe. I'm not saying that he's done enough, but he's also working under a difficult assignment where he's the only guy who really has the tools on the team currently to be a Sam linebacker. Certainly of the 2 guys plus Jeremiah Moon, if you want to count him, he's really the guy who's obvious for the role. But even if Bowser comes back, there's no backup Sam linebacker, and Owe would be the only. He would have to play some there. Go back to Houston for a second. One of the things I really liked is the Dolphins run a lot of the boot schemes that we saw a lot from Flacco. We see probably less now from Lamar because booting, I think most people who've heard this show know that I don't really think it's as easy to do with a mobile quarterback. But Houston was not getting fooled on boot plays. So they were all zone blocking to the right usually to get Tua to move left, being a left-handed quarterback. That's easier for him. And Houston on that backside of the play is responsible for diagnosing it as quickly as possible, getting in there. And I thought he did a really good job of that. And it's something that gives the Ravens. It matters most, certainly, when the quarterback is left-handed, but it can also matter even to be able to stop a boot on that side with a right-handed quarterback if they're one of the faster guys in the league, a Kyler Murray or certainly a Lamar Jackson or Jalen Hurts. Those kind of players are able to boot left and do it at 75% of the level. They can boot right. Mahomes being the group too.
Yeah, I definitely saw that too. I thought his effort was good to the sideline, which is
Mhm.
another kind of underrated aspect of his game. I mean, he's not a middle linebacker, but the sideline to sideline effort that he gave, you know, against wide receivers that are moving off into that left hand side, with Tua being a lefty, so many of those plays were on the left hand side, and Houston was a guy helping to push those guys out of bounds for as minimal of a gain as possible.
Did you happen to see the thing on Twitter where they reversed the film so Tua was a right-handed quarterback?
Yeah,
Interesting way to do it. It really is.
yeah,
But you often hear me talk on this show about how a right-handed quarterback moving left is basically going into Death Valley. Particularly with Joe Flacco here all the years, just could not get his body turned at all. He would have to make several steps just to get back oriented properly towards the field to get off a normal kind of a throw for him. But it's very difficult for any right-handed quarterback to move to their left, and we have to similarly believe it'd be difficult for Tua to boot right. And he had a really good throw on a boot right. It was a middle distance throw. It wasn't way down the field or anything, but he had a really good throw on a boot right.
yeah. When you brought that up, I was trying to look in my notes to see where the play was. Tua got pressure from I can't remember if it was one of the interior defensive linemen. Anyways, he gets pressured and has to roll out to his right. He's running pretty hard, and he throws a pass to Jalen Waddle, I believe, on the sideline, and it goes incomplete. And I think a lot of that was due to the pressure of whatever player it was. Because Tua, of course, is a lefty, and it's more natural to roll out left instead of right. So I wanted to give credit to the player, but my notes are.
All right, that's it. You'll find it again. I want
Yeah.
to bring up the next player, if that's okay. I want to talk a little bit about Marcus Williams. We've talked a little bit about what happened to him in this game, but he was one of the guys holding it together for the Ravens in this one. Obviously, in terms of getting the 2 interceptions, that's great. Even on the interception he dropped, he was in the right place. And when you think back to Ed Reed in Baltimore, it's not like Ed Reed never dropped a football in his life. Ed Reed just was in position to make a play on so many more balls than just about any other free safety in the history of the game, that his interception rate, particularly on an adjusted basis, is the highest ever to play. So it's going to happen occasionally that a tip ball is not going to fall into place. And it's really strange to see it after he made, 2 probably interceptions that I would say are the top 15, maybe even 10% of difficulty with those first 2 picks he made. To then drop an easy one that probably was about a 75% chance for him to make it.
Right. It's definitely unfortunate, and it kind of makes you think as Ravens fans of just the kind of passes that would sometimes fall into Chuck Clark's lap last year or over the years. Just the Ravens DBs that haven't had the best hands have had those opportunities, and it's just really, I don't know if it's ironic, but Marcus Williams making those really difficult interceptions, and then the one that should be a gimme for him is the one that he drops.
Yeah.
I did find that play. Sorry. It was the second to last offensive play for the Dolphins in the first half. So the one right before the interception by Marcus Williams on the sideline where he gets the toe tap. So this was a 4-man rush where Justin Houston, who we were talking about, is unblocked on a boot rollout to the offensive right, and he almost gets to him, but the pressure, helps the pass go incomplete to Waddle. And
yeah, so it was Queen on the first and 10 play that went incomplete, right?
Yeah,
okay,
first
gotcha.
and 10, yes, sir.
All
Anyways, yeah, but Marcus Williams clearly was my defensive, I don't want to say MVP, but defensive player of the game for the Ravens in their loss. I mean, how could he not be with the interceptions and ball production that he's done so far?
Yeah, I absolutely, far and away, I thought he was the best. I really did love the play of Demarion Williams. We talked a little bit about him. I'm trying to see if there's anything in my notes that I didn't really hit on when we talked about what was going on. Loved the reaching across the body ability. I mean, he has a much larger deflection radius than I expect for a man his size, which is really outstanding. He did some good downhill tackling after the play. On that 3rd and 2 play, he tackled Hill a yard short of the line to gain. That was middle of quarter 2. And he took him down and forced a 4th and 1 that they converted.
Right.
But still, that was nice. What else did we have? There was a 3rd and 7 early in the game that got converted where he was just a hair late on making a PD across the body of Gesicki. So when, he had lots of good opportunities for PDs lots of bad opportunities for PDs in this game that were not really that good. And generally speaking, he converted a reasonable percentage of these low quality opportunities, I thought, in this game. So good stuff. Really was a pain to lose him. I thought he was out for the year, the way he was lying in the back of the end zone there, but it's good to see him get up and whoever the announcer was, identify the fact that he's drinking as he's going off the field, which leads him to believe it's probably a cramping problem.
Right. Yeah. And that was a good sign, even though we didn't have Pepe for the last play. A cramping issue is much better than any sort of leg injury. So, I mean, that's a plus. I found the play you were talking about. I mean, I'm sure the fans know, but the completion to Mike Gesicki, where he was the slot right outside wide receiver in that alignment. Pepe was in such tight coverage. It was 3rd and 7, 12 minutes, 10 seconds left in the first quarter.
That's the one.
Yeah, I mean, it was a beautiful play, but unfortunately the pass was, pretty perfect, and Gesicki hauled it in for the first down.
All right. What else we got going on here? Do you have any other players you'd like to talk about? We can take some questions here if we're out of players.
Yeah, we can take questions. I don't want to talk about the negative players more than what we have.
Right. So we've got
all right. You want to get into some mailbag?
Sure, by all means, Josh.
All right. Mailbag always has some repeat, but it's good to get some closure at the end of the show and focus on some of the questions that come in using the hashtag Film Study Mailbag over on Twitter. All right. First up, let's go back to Oweh a little bit. And Brad was wondering, he was hoping about more pressure production from him, but he's being used more as a Sam role and not as a pass rusher. Is that surprising to you? Or is he not being used correctly?
I'll go through a couple of things. There's no one else to play Sam. So there's no one else with the traits to play Sam. That said, I don't think the Sam coverage drops completely explain the drop in production. I think there are other things that will do a better job. Oweh is being forced to basically play every snap after Means's injury, which happened, well, it was the first drive of Q2. Starting 5 plays later, Oweh played the first of a lot of snaps for the rest of the game. In fact, he only got 6 snaps off the remainder of the game, and that was most of the Dolphins' plays. Second half, took 2 total snaps off. Anybody asked to make that many consecutive plays is going to have difficulty. And so they did a much better job, frankly, of getting Houston off the field for some in the second half and trying to keep him on a little bit of a pitch count to try and keep him marginally fresh. But there just isn't anyone else to take that Sam role if it's not Oweh with in terms of what traits they have.
Jake, all right.
I mean, I think you answered that perfectly, so I don't really have a comment.
All right. Well, let's tackle on Alex's comment over on YouTube. While adding another outside linebacker acquisitions is inevitable, do we think someone else on the roster could provide a higher level of replacement play? And does Means getting hurt reduce Oweh and Houston's production?
Go ahead and start with that one, Jake, and I'll.
Yeah. So, I mean, to answer, the acquisition is inevitable. I do believe they will bring another outside linebacker up, whether that means it's from the practice squad and it's just an elevation, or they, sign somebody to the 53. Either of those could definitely happen. I think one of the two will certainly happen. I don't think there's a person on the roster that could provide a higher level of replacement play outside of the guys that are injured. And then we're hoping to get back soon, which would be Tyus Bowser and the unknown of David Ajabo, which the unknown right now is very appealing, which is
well
funny.
said.
It's very appealing because right now we have very little in the cupboard.
Yeah, Ajabo is a pure rush guy. He's not going to drop the coverage and give the Ravens anything there. So he'll be a guy who comes in, hopefully can play the run a little bit, has good length, and is a guy who can be Houston's early down counterpart. But I wouldn't expect him to be playing on the Sam side. I don't think there is another guy who can provide even replacement level play, as I understand the word to be used. In terms of who they have on the roster right now, I think they'd have to go outside the organization. In terms of the practicality of that, they're not going to sign anyone who costs any more than a vet min contract at this point. The club has hardly any flexibility in terms of salary cap. They have almost no dollars. They just did something with Chuck Clark to free up another $750. But basically, they're scraping the bottom of the barrel, and an early injury to Means is actually going to cost them a lot of that value. We may even be in a position here fairly soon where the Ravens don't have the entire 53 filled on a week-to-week, because then that'll tell you they're really scraping, trying to get those last dollars. But there's nobody above a vet min contract they're going to get, and a vet min Sam linebacker is not going to be much because those guys are unicorns to start with. They're a much rarer set of abilities. They're generally not particularly easy to scout at the college level because the good pass rushers tend to be guys who are given that responsibility, and they tend to also be the athletic freaks who might be able to play Sam for you in the NFL. So it takes some real sifting through, some real frog kissing to get to a guy at Sam linebacker who might be any good.
All right. Patrick is wondering, it looked like the Ravens were playing very soft zone coverage with receivers open all the time. Do you credit this to blown coverages, poor calls, or is this credit to the Dolphins?
I mean, I think they were playing a lot of off coverage, a lot of zone coverage. That honestly, like Ken was talking about earlier, should be the bread and butter of this defense with the personnel that they have. Marcus Peters could be a phenomenal cover 3 corner, somebody that's looking towards the quarterback for more interception playmaking opportunities. Same thing goes for our safety, who has 3 interceptions on the season, Marcus Williams. And then you have other guys that potentially could start making plays in Kyle Hamilton and Marlon Humphrey and Pepe Williams even. So I like the zone coverage element. I also think a piece of it in this game is the 2 threats of that Miami offense are speedsters in a major way. Tyreek Hill is the deep threat, and certainly Jalen Waddle can do that too. But Hill is kind of more of the known commodity for really being able to catch those balls deep down the field. And the Ravens were trying to give cushion because they don't have a ton of healthy corners that are experienced out there that can really run with these guys. So I think it's a mixture of a lot of things.
Yeah, I do. And you hit on most of that, Jake. So I don't want to repeat everything we kind of said early in the episode. And you stated very well there. But another thing is just the Ravens, no matter what they do, if they have 2 inside linebackers on the field, or even 3 sometimes when they're playing Harrison as an outside linebacker, that's a lot of coverage weakness. Those are guys who, in theory, have underneath coverage responsibilities. And if they can't do a lot with that, that means somebody else either has to come in and make up a tackle, or that they have to be aware that the inside linebacker can't do much to help them on a route that's run between level 2 and 3. We saw a fair amount of plays made between level 2 and 3. Again, some of them ridiculously wide open in terms of the players being there. And I think, some of that responsibility just ends up on the inside linebackers. It's not all on the safeties and corners, even though the Ravens had problems there too in this game.
All right, let's close out the mailbag with this Spencer question that you each can answer. All right, so put yourself in the role as defensive coordinator. What lesson do you learn from this game and take away? Is there any players you expect to have a come to Jesus moment based on this game?
I
Yeah.
can go first if you
Yeah,
if
go
you
ahead.
don't. Sure. I mean, to me, the guy who they have an option on who they have on the field is Patrick Queen. So he's the guy. If you want to take him off the field on passing downs and still not destroy the guy's career, because he still gets to play the other downs. He'll be fresher. Hopefully, he can give you more in terms of the pass rush, more in terms of a block shedder and run defender on earlier downs, more in terms of just being able to cover screen passes and wheel routes on early downs. But he is just a huge liability in the middle of the field, and other teams are picking on him. And when Joe Flacco and Tua, who are very different quarterbacks, are both basically finding that same spot on the field, and Dean Pease had a way of saying that they will find that guy. Whoever he is out there, they will find him. It was even true with a player like Mosley, who was an excellent coverage inside linebacker. But there were times when he was on the field that he was the weakest guy out there, and the team would still try and throw at him. Well, they've got to do something to get better coverage. And I think they can have a 2-for-1 if they effectively replace Stone for Queen at inside linebacker and bring Hamilton up short, in that they probably are maximizing the abilities of both Stone and Hamilton in terms of where they play on the field.
Yeah, I think you answered that question perfectly. Just to have another answer, I will say give Kyle Hamilton a more defined role, especially early on as he's learning how to communicate in the secondary and what is going on when an offense gets up to the line quickly, when plays are coming in fast. He just needs to know where he is. So I'd like for him to focus more on inside the box responsibilities, whether that's covering a tight end, covering running backs, covering a big wide receiver, or just playing those soft zones, or in the flat and stuff like that. I really like that more for him than this kind of questioning: is he supposed to be deep? Is he not? So I would just define his role and make sure he understands everything, because he's a talented player. He just needs to learn and get this experience.
Right, I agree, and I don't see anything. I haven't seen anything yet that tells me he can't get it turned around. Most of his tackling problems seem more to be about taking an angle to the play as opposed to not being a good wrap-up player. And what I'm not saying we haven't seen anything that hasn't worked from that perspective, but I think I've seen more in terms of not taking good angles to the football. And I hope that the Ravens will derive value for him on tight ends, as you said, and underneath being a hulking presence that can create a problem to throw over the way Calais Campbell and Brent Urban should be at the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, I agree.
We done, Josh, anymore, or is that it?
Yeah, that'll do it for the mailbag today. People can continue to get your questions in using the hashtag Film Study Mailbag over on Twitter.
And hopefully we'll get some for the offense show tomorrow night. We actually doing that tomorrow during the day. We won't be doing a live stream. Sarah Ellison and I will be recording the show then during the day, and we'll have a lot of fun with that, I'm sure, because she is very passionate.
Well, then, Ken, let me get the one offense question in here that's flooded the YouTube comments, and it's on Twitter as well, is how much of this collapse do you put on the shoulders of the offense?
It's hard to put a lot on the shoulder of the offense given how effective they were in scoring points. There's nothing about the points per drive that I'd look at and you'd say, well, the Ravens didn't do the job against the Miami Dolphins. I think they did. Some of the things about not being able to close out the game, not being able to convert on short yardage, extraordinarily frustrating. And any one of those, putting the game away on any of the many Mike Davis 0-yard runs, or the Lamar -1 on fourth down, or the Lamar fumble on fourth down, would have been a nice change.
Yeah, I have to agree on that. It's tough to, point blame to the offense that had, 31 points. I believe that would be over the expectation of probably Vegas, over the expectation of a lot of fans, against a very strong Miami defense that, dismantled the Ravens last year. 31 points is good. That's good enough for you to win games, most games. And the fact that the Ravens couldn't close it out on defense, I would I would say is the bigger blame, but not converting on fourth downs. Maybe some of it is the unwillingness or maybe lack of desire to change up play calls when you run the same play essentially 4 times in a row. But then also it's the ability of the players and the execution to actually get the job done, even if you are calling the same play in those situations, trying to get a first down or in the case of the goal line, a touchdown. So, correcting those is definitely a big part of it, but the defense deserves most of the blame if we're going to point fingers.
Yeah, completely agree. Jake, been an absolute pleasure to talk football with you. Thanks. We'll make sure we get you on again, hopefully this year. But if not, hopefully we'll do some content between seasons that we'll be talking about some interesting short topics or other things about the draft. I'm sure you do a lot with relation to that. I know you're a big Georgia Bulldogs fan.
Yes, sir. Thankfully, I have some positive football in my life, even when the Ravens don't play up to their best. All
right, and he's at Real Jake Vogel on Twitter. And you mentioned the other place you write is.
I'm not doing any writing. I do a podcast, First and Goal Pod, and you can find that wherever you listen to podcasts.
All right. Outstanding, Jake. Other folks out here, for the loyal fans who have been here listening to this and providing questions and whatnot in the margins, we really appreciate it. We'll probably do this live stream idea again if folks appreciate it. If you did, please tag something out there when I post the show saying, hey, I like the live format. If you didn't, that's fine. Don't have to put anything. But we just want to get some feedback on whether this is a useful format and people are liking it. Jake, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks so much, Ken.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.